Hey, this is Francois from Homeport, and today we're going to be talking about. Today we're going to be talking about. Today we're going. Today we're going to be talking about coffee grinders. Hey, Francois from Homeport here, bringing you this video today to talk to you about blade versus burr grinders. I've got three here. This is a blade grinder, this is a wheel burr grinder, and this is a conical burr grinder. We're going to be talking about the differences between them, why you might want one versus the other, and what they're good for and what you would use them for. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is a blade coffee grinder. And so this is a blade coffee grinder right here. You can see inside, it's got this little spinning blade with the wings. And the way that this grinds coffee is that blade spins and just sort of whips the beans around like a blender would. And this does a pretty good job. I say pretty good because as the beans sort of get more and more ground, what's going to happen is the grind will get less and less consistent. Some parts of it will be ground very finely, other parts might be sort of a medium coarseness, and it may even, if it doesn't ever hit the blade, leave some pretty big chunks of coffee in there. And I'll put up some picture examples of what that might look like. So it does a pretty good job if you're going to be just doing regular drip coffee. This does a fair job. You know, it's good for most purposes. They also make great spice grinders. So if you have one of these and you're planning to upgrade to a burr grinder, hang on to this one, wash it out, and use it for spices because it does a pretty good job of that. So what are some of the drawbacks? Well, if you're trying to get a really fine grind and you're going to be holding that button down for a long time to grind up the beans, what's going to happen is those beans are going to cook in there because of the friction and the motor spinning. They're just going to get hotter, and sometimes what happens is people who grind very finely in these will notice a burned taste in the bean, and that's no good. So one way you can avoid that is just to sort of pulse the button as opposed to just letting it run, and that can help you sort of avoid that. And another thing that sort of helps is if you shake it as you grind and kind of toss it upside down and back and forth, that can help you get to some of those beans that are not getting hit by the blade. Next up, we have a flat burr coffee grinder. And so right here, you can see that this has got basically a burred wheel that stays stationary, while the blade, this might be hard to see because it's a little dark in there, but the blade inside spins. And so what this does is, rather than chopping up the coffee beans with a blade, it's going to crush them. And with the flat one, it's gravity fed. The beans are going to work their way to the burr. The grind is going to be determined by how far the stationary burr is from the spinning one inside. And because that always stays consistent, the distance between the burrs, you're going to get a much more consistent grind. It's going to allow you to fine-tune it and control it much better, so you don't have to worry about an inconsistent grind. If you're going to be doing espresso or certain drip style coffees or even French press, you want a really consistent grind to get a really consistent result. Especially with espresso, because if you get any gaps or cracks, or if the beans are ground to a point where they're not all the same size, it's going to be really hard to get a nice rich crema. Also with burr grinders, because there tends to be a lot more to them, they allow you to do things like set time limits. And with this one, you control the grind right up here on the top. You can hear it sort of clicking as it settles into place. And so you're able to control it between fine and coarse grinds just by spinning the top of the mechanism here. And you can set the time that it grinds for right up top here, so that you're pretty much going to get the same quantity at the same consistency every time. And with a little bit of practice, you'll be able to dial it in just right so that you don't waste any coffee. So the last one I'm going to talk to you guys about is a conical burr grinder. And you may think to yourself, Francois, the flat burr grinder sounds great. Why would I ever need to upgrade to the conical burr grinder? Conical burr grinders do a little bit better of a consistent grind, and they're also better at grinding beans that are oilier. They're not going to jam up as frequently as a flat burr grinder will, and that's because of the way that they feed. They're also gravity fed, but if you look on the inside here, you're going to notice that there's this cone, and the cone sort of allows them to sort of fall into place, so it's not really putting a lot of pressure on the bean. It'll sort of just kind of crumble and fall through. And that allows, and the spinning will actually shoot it out into the container here. You might have oily beans if you're doing darker roasts, or certain espresso beans are going to be pretty oily. And having a conical burr grinder is going to keep it from jamming up. And if you put oily beans into a burr grinder, a flat burr grinder, if they're really oily, you're going to notice it jam up pretty frequently. You're going to have to open this thing, and you may even have to clean it out mid-grind. But on a conical burr grinder, I've had pretty good results. I've used this one actually a lot, and I think I've only had it jam up maybe once, and that was after doing a lot of really oily beans. But conical burr grinders are going to be better for that, and you won't have to worry about it as much. That being said, conical burr grinders are very easy to clean. Most of them come apart into a bunch of pieces so that you can just brush them off individually. This one is really easy. Just take it apart like that, brush them off, and you're good to go. Blade grinders range in price. You could probably get one for under $20. Some of them go up as high as upper 50s. You're not going to notice a big difference between the price breaks, though. If you're getting a blade grinder, they all do the same thing. They spin a little motor and they spin that blade, and it's going to kind of be up to you whether you're shaking it or holding the button down longer, what kind of grind you're going to get. So you're not going to notice a big difference between the very expensive blade grinders and the very cheap blade grinders. So if you're going to get one, get one that you like the look of, and that's not too expensive. Burr grinders are sort of the next step up. If you're going to be doing different types of coffee brews, like French press, drip coffee, espresso, and maybe you want to do all of them at different times, a burr grinder is going to be the way to go. It's going to give you a really consistent experience, and once you get it dialed in, they're very easy to use. You can just basically push the button and walk away from it. So that's very convenient. Read reviews. Some burr grinders do much better with the oily beans, especially the flat blade ones. You want to make sure that you're picking one that sort of has a good range of the types of beans that it can handle. Conical burr grinders are the most expensive ones, or at least in my experience, you'll get some varying info about that on the internet, but in my experience, the conical blade grinders are the most expensive. They also work the best. If you're in a commercial setting, they're most likely using a conical burr grinder of some kind. That's because they do a super consistent, very good job with any type of bean. They're a little bit more expensive, but if you're looking for that consistency, definitely worth the price. Some of them are not too expensive. This one's $100. You can probably start getting conical burr grinders for around $60, $70. And the more you spend on a conical burr grinder, typically the more features it'll include. Like this one has a little timer on it and allows you to set the grind. Some of them also have scales built in so that you can measure out exactly how much coffee you're getting every time for super duper consistency. If that's something that's important to you, you may want to spend a little more money, but you can get into them for a fairly reasonable price. So that about wraps it up for our... That about wraps it up for our conversation on burr versus blade grinders. Just can't win. I recommend getting a burr grinder fairly inexpensive one if you're going to be doing a lot of different types of coffee. If you have any questions for us, you can leave them in the comments below. We try to get back to everybody. If you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks.
Francois, that's delicious coffee. This is not regular coffee. This is gourmet coffee.
I know how good the coffee is, Dad. I use a conical burr grinder because I want to taste it. I know how good the coffee is. I gotta tell you, this video smells a lot better than our garlic one.
Sure.
Some people will say they'll jam up very easily if they're using an oily bean, and you want to look out for that, especially if you plan to use them with oily beans. Oily beans. Oily beans. That's good Java.